I'd like to say to the incoming US administration is that the world is in very grave danger, that as they know the way in which the Bush administration behaved, regrettably supported unconditionally by the UK government, has made the world more dangerous, and we need to get back to a more sensible balance. Nuclear proliferation is part of the problem, and it overlaps with the problems of the Middle East because of the focus of the world on the risks of Iran nuclearizing. Now, everybody knows that Israel has nuclear weapons, and most of us think that Israel is the dominating power, expanding the land it takes and threatening the balance of power in the Middle East. I know that's not a common discourse in the US, but it is in the rest of the world. My own view on that is that if we don't get a two-state solution very quickly, then we're going to have decades of bloodshed and mounting anger getting ever worse and intense across the Muslim and Arab world. And as part of all of this, we've got the possibility that Iran might get nuclear weapons. I mean, Iran says they only want civil nuclear power, which of course they're entitled to under the Non-Proliferation Treaty, but the rest of the world, or the authorities in the world, believe that they are trying to get nuclear weapons. Now, I have to say I hate nuclear weapons, and I believe that there is absolutely no case at all for the UK, for example, to replace its current nuclear weapons. But if I were Iran, I would try to get hold of a nuclear weapon in the same way as did Israel, did India, and so on, first denying that you're doing it and then it's a fait accompli. Not because I wanted to or ever intended to use them, but so that I couldn't be threatened by Israel with their potential use, and power in the Middle East would be more balanced. I understand that some of the senior Islamic authorities in Iran have said nuclear weapons are immoral, and I agree with that. But we've got a completely unbalanced situation in the Middle East. Now, the new administration is wisely committed to talk to Iran and try to reach a settlement. But it seems to me it'll be almost impossible to reach a settlement with all the oppression and inequality in the Middle East and Gaza and its aftermath, if the talks are simply about saying Iran can't have civil nuclear power, but nothing's to be done about Israel-Palestine and Israel being highly armed power with nuclear weapons. On the other hand, I agree that if Iran gets nuclear weapons, then Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Jordan and so on would want nuclear weapons, and there's even been some moves in that direction with some of the Arab countries coming together and talking about possibly nuclearizing. And then we'd have nuclear weapons in the most volatile region of the world, which would, the risks of the use become enormously high, and it's desperately dangerous for the world. So it seems to me, I know that the incoming administration's got a lot on its plate. I understand how serious is the situation in the American and the world economy, and I understand the commitments that have been made about Iraq and about Afghanistan. But if there isn't a really big effort to move forward on the Middle East, together with stopping the proliferation of nuclear weapons, then I'm afraid the foreign policy objectives of the new administration are likely to fail, and the situation will get worse and more violent and more dangerous for everybody. And I believe the solution is to go back to the Barcelona Agreement and various other agreements, which is to denuclearize the Middle East, to get a proper settlement on Israel-Palestine, just to stand up for international law, be less unbalanced. In international law, the Palestinians are entitled to their state on 67 boundaries. If they had that, and Israel was required to remove its settlements and so on, we could have peace. But then Israel should be required to give up its nuclear weapon, and Iran and all the other powers in the Middle East to commit to no WMD. And then we could get on with dealing with the threat of global warming and all the rest of it. So I think there's no peace in the Middle East without settling Israel-Palestine, but I think there's no safety in the Middle East without attending to nuclear proliferation. And that means just ganging up on Iran is not good enough. You've got to denuclearize the region. And then more broadly, if you look at Britain, desperate to be the best friend of the US, We have a nuclear weapon. It's pointing at no one, and no one is pointing at us. And yet we have a policy decision that says, because the future is uncertain, we must have another. We've got a whole series of very senior ex-generals recently saying, this is silly, we need a different kind of capacity, we can't afford the money and it's nonsense. But it's equally, it encourages proliferation. If because the future is uncertain, Britain has to have a nuclear weapon, then every country in the world can say they need a nuclear weapon. And Britain certainly isn't in the most unstable and dangerous region of the world. So as the big friend to the UK, it really is time for the US to say to the UK, sorry friend, we know you're our friend, but this is silly. And no, we're not going to help you to replace your nuclear weapon. We're going to have a real effort at strengthening and going back to the Non-Proliferation Treaty, at making progress in the Middle East, including on nuclear weapons, and we need you to be willing to give up as part of that process. And of course, if America lent on Britain, Britain would say yes. And then the world would breathe an enormous sigh of relief, and the new administration could be very proud of what it would achieve for the world. So please, I would be delighted if you went down that road.